If you grew up in the north like I did, you probably have some strong feelings about snow, whether they be positive or negative. I, for one, have always been fond of snow, and when you combine it with my favorite thing ever, football, oh buddy. Whether physically playing in the crunchy whiteout yourself, or cozying up under a blanket to watch the picturesque blizzard through the TV, you're always bound for a good time. There's just something magical about watching some of the greatest athletes on the planet attempt to play America's most physical and most technical sport while trudging through inches of the white powder and sliding all across the field. The on-field performances might not always be up to par, and understandably so, but the aesthetic is still usually spectacular enough for the game to leave a lasting memory. However, occasionally there are a few players great enough to overcome the harsh conditions and put together sensational games. I present the top 10 greatest individual performances in the snow in NFL history. Now, before we start the official list, I must lay out a few ground rules. First, for games to be included, there must actually be snow visible on the ground. That sounds obvious, of course, but I say this to mean that purely cold weather games are not included. Sorry, Ice Bowl. Secondly, the amount of snow present does have an impact. A good performance in a light snow may be lower than one in a game that needs to be snowplowed. Additionally, there have been many great or memorable games in the snow over the years, like Vikings-Ravens in 2013, Browns-Bills in 2007, or the Leon Lett game. But this list is only looking at individual performances, i.e., a great performance in a blowout takes precedence over a good performance in a close game. Finally, this is by no means a comprehensive list. It is sometimes difficult to find weather details for older games, so this may have a tinge of recency bias. Feel free to let me know what your favorite snow game is that I missed. And without further ado, number 10, Jerome Bettis in 2005 against the Chicago Bears. So, the stat line on this game might not leap off of the page at you, but the context is key. At this point in the season, the Steelers were reeling, losers of 3 straight, and in came a 9-3 Chicago team that had won 8 straight games on the backs of the best defense in football. Bettis' final season in the NFL to that point had not gone swimmingly. He had just 186 yards on 67 carries in his first 8 games, good for 2.78 yards per attempt. However, that day the weather called for a bruising back to lead the way, and the bus was there to answer the call with his first 100-yard game and his first multi-TD game of the season. His 5.9 yards per carry was his best mark in a game since 2001. On his second score of the game, he famously ran over Defensive Player of the Year Brian Urlacher on his way to the end zone, refusing to be stopped by anyone. He put the finishing touches on the 21-9 win with a 39-yard run, as this game sparked the start of an 8-game winning streak, ending in a Super Bowl title for Pittsburgh. Number 9, Jim Kelly against the Dolphins in the divisional round of the 1990 AFC playoffs. Buffalo, the NFL city most synonymous with snow games, so you won't be surprised to see multiple Bills on this list. In this AFC East matchup, the snow started light before quickly coating the entire ground. The air might have been freezing that day, but Kelly was on fire, outdueling 1983 draft mate and fellow Hall of Famer Dan Marino in a shootout, as the weather didn't seem to bother either one in the 44-34 game. Kelly completed 65% of his passes for 339 yards on a staggering 11.7 yards per attempt mark. He threw 3 scores compared to just 1 turnover, good for a 122.5 passer rating. This wasn't some cheap dink and dunking either. Kelly was consistently throwing down the field into tight coverage. This throw to James Lofton on the sideline between multiple defenders is simply absurd. Oh, and for good measure, Kelly also tacked on 37 rushing yards. It was a complete performance as he led his team to the AFC Championship. Number 8, Ryan Grant in the 2007 divisional playoffs against the Seahawks. With how Grant started this game, it had the potential to be the worst snow game ever. He lost a fumble on 2 of his first 3 touches of the game, leading to a 14-0 Seattle lead just 4 minutes into the game. However, the first-year breakout player instantly redeemed himself by rushing for 47 yards 2 drives later and tying the game. And the heavier the snow started falling, the better Grant got, running all around and all over poor Seahawks defenders. He wore them down with a bunch of 6 and 8 yard gains before 24, 43. He scored his third touchdown of the day early in the fourth to put the game away at 42-20. But he still wasn't done, as he pulled out one last 28-yard run on the next drive. He exited the game for good with 10 minutes left, finishing with 201 rushing yards on 7.4 yards per carry and 3 touchdowns. Just imagine how lofty that number could have been had he stayed in for clock-killing mode. Number 7. Lesean Mccoy in 2017 against the Colts. Here's that other Buffalo Bill I mentioned. And you know, honestly, this could easily be a lot higher up on the list purely due to the fact that it had the harshest playing conditions of any on the list. Don't believe me? Just look at the screen. You can't even see anything with all the snow coming down. And even when it did slow down a bit, it was still difficult to see because of all the snow compiled on the ground that would kick up whenever any player moved. In fact, even McCoy said himself that this game was harder to play in than the famous 2013 Eagles-Lions game because the snow never stopped. Despite all this, McCoy still almost averaged 5 yards a carry despite getting fed the rock 32 times. But that's just because he's the best snow player of all time, as you will see later on in this list. McCoy averaged 3.81 yards after contact per rush, forcing 8 missed tackles. And he just makes it all look so second nature. I mean, the guy was out here hurdling defenders and still running while playing in a snowstorm. McCoy ended the game with a 21-yard score in overtime, which was essential in helping Buffalo make the playoffs for the first time in 18 years. Number 6. Steve Van Buren against the Chicago Cardinals in the 1948 NFL Championship. The Eagles got their revenge on the Cardinals, who had beaten Philly in the championship the year before, and they wouldn't have been able to do it without Van Buren. Funny thing is, they very nearly had to do it without Van Buren. That afternoon, the field was so covered in snow that the yard lines were completely invisible. Van Buren once said to Ray Didinger, "I looked out my bedroom window that morning, saw the snow, and went back to bed. I was sure the game would be postponed." But alas, as they usually do, the NFL just pushed forward. Van Buren's car was snowed in at his driveway, so he had to travel via bus and subway before walking the last 7 blocks to the stadium. Once the game started, Van Buren recalled that he couldn't even see Chicago's safety because of how hard it was snowing. It was a scoreless game through 3 quarters, but the Eagles kept riding their future Hall of Fame back, and he pulled through, rushing for 98 yards and scoring the game-winning touchdown. Number 5. Davante Adams in 2020 against the Titans. Yet another Packer and our first wide receiver on the list. Adams is arguably the most complete wide receiver in the NFL today, and he showed off his full repertoire last year against Tennessee, not getting slowed by the inclement weather one bit. In the first quarter, he employed his physicality, throwing a stiff arm and breaking a tackle to score his first touchdown. In the second quarter, he displayed his fancy footwork as he beat Adoree Jackson at the snap and masterfully got both feet down in the back of the end zone for his second score of the night. Then he exemplified why he is perhaps the best route runner in football with his third score, as he made DBs look silly all night. He showed elite speed on this 27-yard screenplay and strong hands on this spectacular falling grab near the sideline. 11 receptions on 12 targets, 9 going for first downs, 142 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Just simply absurd. Number 4, Le'Veon Bell in 2016 on the road against the Bills. So 3 out of 10 games were played in Buffalo. Good to note, but this time it was an opponent. Le'Veon Bell in his prime was such a joy to watch. A unique type of runner if there ever was one, thanks to his patience with letting the play unfold on every down. Maybe that's why he had his career best game in the snow, since he was already used to playing at his own pace. What does 236 rushing yards plus 62 receiving yards equal? It equals the 10th most yards from scrimmage in a single game ever, 298. He carried the ball 38 times on the afternoon and still averaged 6.2 yards per attempt because he consistently ground out chunk yardage. On one third quarter 82-yard touchdown drive, Bell accounted for 72 yards, 13 here, 7 there, 24 here with a mean stiff arm to boot, 8 there, and another 5 here to cap it all off. And of course, the famous Bell hurdle, only half effective here, but it makes for a great visual. He had defenders bouncing off of him all day as he picked up 139 of his 236 yards after contact and 57 of his 62 receiving yards after the catch. He was truly a one-man show that afternoon. Number 3, Adam Vinatieri in the 2001 divisional round playoffs against the Raiders. Kicking a field goal is arguably the most difficult task in football to accomplish in the snow, especially when it's 5 inches of snow you're dealing with. But when you're Adam Vinatieri, there's really nothing to worry about. The Patriots trailed Oakland 13-10, but their 2-minute drill drive stalled after Tom Brady threw an incomplete pass on second down at the Raiders' 29-yard line. He gained 1 yard on a QB sneak the following play in an attempt to center the ball for his kicker. But New England had 0 timeouts and thus 0 time to clear a path in the snow for Vinatieri to kick. He just ran straight out from the bench and knocked down a 45-yarder to send the game to overtime. Vinatieri said he knew Oakland wouldn't get a good rush because of the conditions, so he was focused more on not falling on his way to the ball, taking baby steps to it. Bill Belichick called it the greatest kick he has ever seen. Come overtime, the Patriots actually had time to clear the field for Vinatieri to kick cleanly, but this chip shot probably would have been good either way. With the win, Vinatieri jump-started one of the greatest dynasties in sports history. Number 2, Tom Brady in 2009 against the Tennessee Titans, the only game on the list that didn't occur in December or January, but rather mid-October. Brady finally got back to his 2007 self in this game after tearing his ACL the previous year, tossing bombs to Randy Moss down the field between multiple defenders and making it look far too easy. In fact, Brady spread the ball around so well that afternoon that both Moss and Wes Welker could have easily also been on this list, but I restricted myself to 1 per game. The 2 receivers combined for 18 catches, 279 yards, and 5 touchdowns. But Brady was the one who set the NFL record for most passing touchdowns in a single quarter with 5, so he gets the nod here. To make it even crazier is that he threw all 5 after the 10-minute mark of the second quarter, and he threw a 6th less than 5 minutes into the third quarter. So really, he threw 6 in that 15-minute span. Meanwhile, he only threw 5 incompletions all afternoon. 11.2 yards per attempt, 152.8 passer rating, 95.6 QBR. It would have been one of the best QB performances of the century regardless, but the fact that he did it in these hectic conditions and without playing the last 25 minutes of the game gives it so much more credence. And finally, the number 1 snow performance in NFL history. Lesean McCoy in 2013 against the Detroit Lions, as I'm sure you all expected. I mean, what else could it be? I already said it before, he's the greatest snow performer ever, and this was the game that proved that to the world. 29 carries, 217 yards on 7.5 yards a pop, and 2 touchdowns in a game that featured 7 inches of snow. And the craziest part? He didn't even really get going until the fourth quarter, where he picked up 148 of his 217 yards and scored both of his touchdowns on runs of 40 and 57 yards. Whereas every member of the Lions defense looked like they were running in mud, McCoy looked exactly the same as he does in any ordinary sunny September 1 o'clock game. There's a reason his Twitter handle is @CutOnDime25. Just look at some of these sick cutbacks he was making in half a foot of snow. That's a Pro Bowl DB he just sent flying into the covered turf. Just disgusting in the most complimentary way possible. 6 runs of 10 or more yards, 8 forced missed tackles, and 103 yards after contact, which could have been more if Shady simply wasn't so shifty, making defenders miss before they could even lay a hand on him. It was one of the greatest rushing performances in NFL history, regardless of weather, which is why it takes the top spot here. Lesean McCoy, the greatest snow athlete of all time.